Nobody teaches you this, but most people don't devalue you because you're weak, uninteresting, or insufficient. They devalue you because you become too predictable. While you believe that constant presence, continuous effort, and good intentions build value, the real world responds differently. Machiavelli already warned, politics guided by reality, not by ideals. And reality is simple, albeit uncomfortable. The more available you become, the less rare you seem. Perhaps you've experienced this before. You give attention, time, energy, and yet you feel the respect diminishing, the interest cooling, the other person starting to test you, pushing your limits, treating your presence as a given. And then comes the painful question, what did I do wrong? The answer is almost never in what you did less of, but in what you did too much of. The end justifies the means when the goal is to preserve value. And value doesn't come from insistence, it comes from well-positioned scarcity. In this video, you'll understand why men who try less tend to be more desired, why detachment creates attraction, and why being the prize has nothing to do with ego, but with emotional strategy. Is it better to be feared than loved? Perhaps not literally, but certainly respected before being accessible. If you're tired of giving and receiving crumbs, stay until the end. What you'll learn here changes not only how others see you, it changes how you position yourself in the game. If something inside you awakened while listening, don't ignore that feeling. This channel isn't about videos, it's about memories. Remember who you were before the fear, before the exhaustion, before the silence. Each new video here is a different reflection of your own soul, an invitation to understand what the world never taught you. The power you seek outside has always been within you. If you feel that this journey speaks to what lives silently within you, sign up now, not to follow yet another creator, but to reconnect with something the world tried to make you forget. Because here, every word was made to heal, each reflection to awaken, and each video serves as a reminder you are not alone on the path back to yourself. Click on subscribe and turn the algorithm into a daily reminder of who you really are. There's a silent paradox that almost no one notices, but which governs a large part of human relationships. The more a man tries to be present, available, and accessible, the less value he communicates. It seems unfair, I know. The rational mind even protests, saying that affection, attention, and constancy should bring people closer. But real life doesn't operate by the logic of should, but rather by decisions based on real human nature. This is where Machiavelli enters uninvited, reminding us that politics guided by reality, not by ideals, is what separates those who influence from those who beg. When presence becomes guaranteed, it ceases to be perceived as a choice and begins to be treated as an obligation. And everything that is an obligation quickly loses its charm. The man who molds himself to always be there believes he is building connection, but without realizing it, he is teaching the other side that he has no alternatives, no direction of his own. He confuses effort with value, and this mistake is costly. In practice, women rarely lose interest because a man wasn't good enough. They lose interest when they feel he's lost his balance. Constant availability doesn't communicate care. It communicates neediness disguised as kindness, an appearance of virtue that doesn't sustain attraction for long. It's like a product that's always on sale. Nobody feels the urgency to buy it. The end justifies the means when the goal is to maintain one's own value, and the means here isn't coldness, it's balance. A man who cancels personal commitments to meet any emotional demand is saying without words that he doesn't even manage his own schedule. Machiavelli would call this a strategic error. Better to be feared than loved? Not in the literal sense, but in the silent respect that arises when someone realizes you don't abandon yourself to please others. Scarcity, when used with calculated emotional force, creates perceived value. This doesn't mean childish games or dramatic disappearances. It means having a life that doesn't revolve around a single source of validation. A simple example: maintaining your training, your projects, your friends, even when the temptation to always be available arises. This is how you build your own loyal armies, starting with your own routine, your own discipline. Virtue lies in sustaining presence without dissolving into it, and fortune favors those who don't over-explain themselves. When availability becomes a conscious choice, not an impulse, something begins to change on the other side. But this movement only becomes clear when you understand that desire doesn't arise from absolute certainty. It arises from the possibility of loss. And that's exactly where the next layer is revealed. Scarcity is not a modern psychological trick. It's an ancient law governing human decisions, desires, and priorities. Anything that can be lost is observed more closely. When something is always available, the brain relaxes, accommodates, and files it away as guaranteed. That's why predictable presence becomes background noise. It doesn't create impact, doesn't generate tension, doesn't stir emotion. Machiavelli already observed that decisions based on real human nature always prevail over those based on good intentions. The man who is always accessible believes he transmits security, but often communicates excessive predictability. And predictability in excess doesn't create desire, it creates silent boredom. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals, teaches that value doesn't arise from absolute constancy, but from the perception of choice. Desire doesn't arise from complete comfort. It arises from the possibility of absence. When someone realizes their presence isn't guaranteed, the brain starts working. Questions arise, hypotheses form, emotions begin to circulate. This is where scarcity creates magnetism. It's not about disappearing, it's about not offering too much. A man who answers everything immediately, explains everything, anticipates everything, eliminates any space for imagination. He leaves no gaps, and where there are no gaps, there is no curiosity. The end justifies the means when the means is protecting one's own emotional value. Avoiding being hated doesn't mean becoming predictable. It means knowing how to balance presence and absence with emotional intelligence. Virtue lies in mastering the impulse to give everything at once. In practice, this translates into simple but powerful attitudes. Not immediately responding to every message, not cancelling personal commitments out of anxiety to please, maintaining hobbies, studies, workouts, and projects that existed before the relationship. Reading, for example, books like The Prince by Machiavelli or The 48 Laws of Power helps to understand how scarcity and control of resources have always generated value. Constant adaptability allows for adjusting presence without creating artificial games. When absence is appropriate, it doesn't push away, it creates emotional movement. And this movement begins to shift the axis of the relationship. But all of this still depends on something bigger. Who is in control of the emotional reality of the interaction? And that's exactly where the next point comes in. Controlling the frame is one of those concepts that, when understood, completely changes how someone positions themselves in the world. In simple terms, whoever defines the reality of the interaction holds the power. Whoever reacts lives within the other person's frame. Many men enter relationships believing they need to adapt emotionally to maintain interest, when in reality, they are giving up their own center of gravity. Machiavelli already warned that decisions based on real human nature are always more effective than those guided by romantic expectations. When a man reacts to every emotional variation, every test, every silence, he communicates instability. And instability doesn't generate attraction, it generates distrust. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, begins by understanding that emotional leadership isn't asked for. It's demonstrated. Men who constantly react end up trapped in the mold of the woman. If she distances herself, he pursues her. If she questions him, he justifies himself. If she tests boundaries, he gives in. Little by little, he loses the ability to define the rhythm, tone, and direction of the relationship. The calculated use of force here is not imposition, it's self-control. It's remaining calm when the other person wavers. It's not over-explaining when there's no real accusation. It's not defending oneself against imaginary attacks. Better to be feared than loved, in this context, means being respected enough that the other person thinks twice before crossing certain boundaries. Avoiding being hated isn't about always pleasing. It's about not lowering oneself to maintain connection. In practice, emotional self-control creates a kind of natural gravity. People gravitate towards those who don't lose their center. A clear example, when a conflict arises, a person with a frame of reference doesn't raise their voice, doesn't rush to convince, doesn't engage in emotional disputes. They listen, respond briefly and clearly, and maintain their standards. This is also built outside of the relationship, with a structured routine, regular physical training, strategic reading, and clear objectives. Books like Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill help develop this internal posture of silent leadership. Your own loyal armies begin with mastering your own mind. And when the other person realizes they can't control their reactions, something powerful is born, uncertainty. And that's exactly where the next gear starts turning. There's an uncomfortable truth that few admit. Obsession doesn't stem from certainty, but from the gap between what is known and what remains a mystery. When everything is too clear, too explained, too predictable, the brain loses interest and moves on. The human mind hates emptiness and does everything to fill it. Machiavelli understood this when he spoke about the appearance of virtue and the control of information. Whoever reveals everything loses an advantage. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, means understanding that not all clarity is a virtue. Sometimes it's just anxiety disguised as honesty. The man who feels the need to explain every action, every silence, every decision is trying to guarantee something that cannot be guaranteed. Desire. Unanswered questions create internal dialogue, and internal dialogue is emotional engagement. When a man over-explains, he eliminates this process. He gives answers before the other person even formulates the question. This seems like maturity, but in practice it's a lack of emotional strategy. The calculated use of force here is knowing when to be silent. It's not lying, it's not manipulating, it's not impulsively blurting everything out. Avoiding being hated doesn't require total transparency, it requires consistency. A centered man doesn't rush to be understood. He knows that those who have value don't need to justify themselves all the time. Better to be feared than loved, in this sense translates to better to be respected for silence than underestimated for verbosity. In real life, this applies simply. If someone questions your absence, you don't need to present a detailed report of your schedule. A short, firm, and calm answer maintains the framework. If curiosity arises about your plans, you share enough, not everything. Keeping personal projects, studies, readings, and goals that aren't constantly exposed creates depth. Reading authors like Machiavelli and Napoleon Hill helps internalize that power comes from controlling the flow, not from pouring out emotional content. Virtù and fortuna walk hand in hand when a person learns to effortlessly maintain mystery. And when this uncertainty settles in, something begins to happen. The dynamic changes, because only those who know they can leave are truly free. There is a stark difference between those who stay by choice and those who stay out of fear. The power to leave lies not in the act of leaving, but in the peace of mind, knowing you can do so without becoming destabilized. Few men develop this capacity because they confuse attachment with connection. Machiavelli already made it clear that decisions based on true human nature require strategic emotional detachment. When someone realizes you need the relationship more than your own peace, the power game is over. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, teaches that those who fear losing lose first. True strength lies in not compromising with yourself that which sustains your dignity. Having non-negotiable standards changes everything. These aren't rules imposed on the other person, they're internal boundaries. When a man accepts disrespect, inconsistency, or instability to avoid being alone, he communicates internal scarcity. And internal scarcity never generates lasting attraction. The calculated use of force here is knowing when to withdraw emotionally before the strain turns into resentment. Better to be feared than loved, in this context, means being respected enough so that the other person knows that certain behaviors have consequences. Avoiding being hated isn't about tolerating everything. It's about not exploding. It's simply about leaving gracefully when boundaries are crossed. In practice, this requires emotional and structural preparation. Having a solid routine, friends, clear goals, and good physical and mental health. Investing time in training, studies, reading, and personal growth builds real independence. Books like Think and Grow Rich reinforce the importance of not depending emotionally on a single source of validation. Your own loyal armies begin with the ability to sustain your own life without begging for connection. When a man demonstrates that he values his peace above temporary ties, something changes in the dynamic, because those who can leave are seen differently. And it is precisely at this point that the next turning point arises, ceasing to compete for value and becoming the prize. Being the prize is an internal change before it's an external behavior. It's not about an inflated ego, arrogance, or games of superiority. It's about inner stability. A man who constantly seeks validation lives reacting to the world. A man who validates himself internally begins to define the world around him. Machiavelli already made it clear that power doesn't come from applause, it comes from position. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, teaches that whoever needs to prove their worth has already lost part of it. The man who is the prize doesn't strive to be chosen. He observes whether the other is worthy of remaining in his life. This inversion is subtle but profoundly transformative. While many men try to convince, explain, impress, or please, the man who is the prize protects his own worth. He doesn't engage in emotional battles to gain approval. He doesn't over-adapt to fit others' expectations. The calculated use of force here is to say less, react less, and sustain more. Better to be feared than loved, in this context, means being respected for self-control, not emotional submission. Avoiding being hated doesn't require self-annihilation. It requires consistency between words and actions. The appearance of virtue only works when it's supported by firm behavior, not emotional performance. In practice, being the prize involves daily choices, investing in your body, mind, career, and character. Having clear habits, regular physical training, strategic reading, purposeful work, and mindful leisure. Books like The Prince and Think and Grow Rich help solidify this mindset of personal leadership. Your own loyal armies are built when you become someone who doesn't depend on others to feel whole. When a man begins to protect his worth instead of proving it, the environment responds. People sense it. And when this posture takes hold, something inevitable happens. The dynamic of the chase is reversed, but this only becomes clear at the next level of the game. When attraction is observed without overly romanticizing it, it becomes clear that it obeys the same laws as power. Machiavelli never spoke of love in modern terms, But he did speak of influence, authority, and permanence, and these principles apply here with surgical precision. Mystery strengthens authority because it creates symbolic hierarchy. Those who do not reveal themselves completely cannot be easily controlled. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals, shows that excessive transparency weakens the position of those who have not yet consolidated their value. The man who gives everything emotionally right from the start believes he is being authentic, but often he is only anticipating an intimacy that has not yet been built. And intimacy without structure becomes a burden. Emotional dependence is a strategic weakness, not because feeling is wrong, but because dependence removes freedom of decision. When a man needs the response, validation, or presence of another to feel good, he loses emotional negotiating power. The calculated use of force, in this context, means not allowing one's own equilibrium to depend on external factors. Better to be feared than loved means here being respected enough not to be constantly tested. Avoiding being hated is not about becoming predictable, it's about not creating resentment through excessive giving. The appearance of virtue only sustains attraction when it is accompanied by genuine detachment. In practice, applying these principles requires emotional maturity. It means maintaining one's own interests, personal projects, and clear objectives, even when the connection seems intense. Reading Machiavelli carefully helps to understand that power comes from the ability to let go without fear. Virtù and fortuna go hand in hand when a person does not cling to specific results. A loyal and personal army begins with loyalty to oneself. When the other person realizes that you can walk away without drama, without threats, and without emotional blackmail, something profoundly changes in the dynamic. Because power, in the end, comes from the capacity for detachment. And it is precisely this detachment that provokes the next silent reversal. The reversal of the pursuit doesn't happen because someone decided to play better, but because the internal dynamic has changed. When a man maintains composure, direction, and calm, something silent occurs. The woman begins to qualify. This isn't manipulation, it's a consequence. Attraction responds to direction, not effort. Machiavelli already made it clear that power is born from those who occupy positions, not from those who chase after them. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, shows that those who invest excessively without criteria lose symbolic value. The man who maintains his balance doesn't seek attention. He observes who deserves access, and this change in perspective is felt immediately. When a man stops seeking validation, he creates space for choice. He doesn't react to every test, doesn't rush to please, doesn't adjust his identity to fit in. The calculated use of force here is tranquility. Better to be feared than loved means at this point being respected enough not to be treated as a disposable option. Avoiding being hated doesn't require submission. It requires clarity of standards. The woman perceives, often without being able to explain it, that she is facing someone who is not emotionally dependent on her. And this generates something rare. Curiosity accompanied by respect. In practice, this inversion holds true when a person maintains genuine freedom of choice. They accept invitations, but also refuse them. They get involved, but don't lose themselves. They show interest without sacrificing their own life. Their own loyal armies remain their routine, their goals, their peace. Virtù and fortuna favor those who don't cling to immediate results. When inner freedom is maintained, desire finds room to grow. And it is precisely at this point that all the teaching connects, not as an isolated technique, but as a way of life. Now, the inevitable question isn't whether this works. The question is, what are you going to do with this knowledge? Because understanding the game without changing your stance only creates more sophisticated frustration. Value isn't begged for, negotiated, or over-explained. It's sustained. From today onward, observe your own decisions. Where are you being too available? Where are you trying to prove your worth? Where are you sacrificing your own peace to maintain fragile connections? Politics, guided by reality, not ideals, begins when you adjust your behavior, not your discourse. So reflect honestly. Are you being chosen, or are you offering yourself? Are you leading your own life or reacting to the emotions of others? Are you building your own loyal armies, your routine, your goals, your discipline, or living at the mercy of external validation? The end justifies the means when the means is self-mastery. Better to be feared than loved in this context is to be respected enough not to be disposable. And that begins the moment you decide to treat yourself as a priority. If something here resonated with you, don't let it die as just another video watched. Test it, adjust it, observe the reactions. Real change happens off-screen, and if you want to continue learning how to position yourself with more strength, clarity, and respect, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and follow the upcoming videos. Because the game doesn't stop. But those who understand the rules stop being pawns and start moving the board.